Continuing our examination of the criticisms leveled against the Quran, we reach another criticism related to the rights and dignity of women. Some critics believe that the Quran considers the legal value and status of a woman to be half that of a man. This claim is raised in various issues such as testimony, blood money, and inheritance. The clearest example of this criticism is verse 282 of Surah Al-Baqarah. This verse speaks about taking witnesses in financial debts and commands that 2 men be chosen as witnesses. If 2 men are not available, then 1 man and 2 women. It appears that this verse establishes that the testimony of 2 women is equal to the testimony of 1 man. This issue has long sparked questions and objections. Commentators and scholars have offered various explanations and justifications. Perhaps in the past, these explanations were acceptable to people, but today, with the advancement of knowledge and changing perspectives, many of those justifications no longer seem convincing to impartial individuals. So, what should be done in such circumstances? In reality, we face 2 paths. Either we must offer justifications that today's generation does not accept, or we must accept that the Quran contains rulings incompatible with reason, conscience, and human dignity. However, neither of these 2 paths seems logical, because when we know that the Quran is the word of the wise and just God, a God who has always emphasized justice, dignity, and women's rights, is it logical that he would want to set women's value at half that of men here? This interpretation does not seem convincing. Many commentators have tried to resolve this issue by citing traditions. Unfortunately, these traditions not only fail to solve the problem, but often complicate it further. Of course, paying attention to these traditions is useful in one aspect. They show us what views existed regarding women in the past, and how strange descriptions and the humiliation of half of humanity were easily accepted even by those who were learned. Of course, this type of view did not exist only in Islamic societies. In the ancient world, women's rights were not recognized globally. Even in countries that today consider themselves defenders of women's rights, until recent centuries, women possessed almost no rights. If we look at the works of great figures and scholars of various religions, cultures, and regions, we see that a derogatory view of women existed in almost all of them. Therefore, we cannot expect something different from our ancestors, because at that time this view was accepted in public opinion worldwide. Some might say that this ruling is devotional and must be accepted without question. But this justification does not seem correct either. Why? Because if God wanted to present this ruling as purely devotional, he would have commanded, act this way, without mentioning a reason. But when God provides a reason and argues, it means there is wisdom and a logical point at work that we must understand. Now, let us pay attention to the reason mentioned in the verse. The verse says that 2 women should replace 1 man, so that if one forgets, the other reminds her. The most common justification offered, consistent with the surface meaning of this reason, is that women's memory is weaker in financial matters. But today, science has shown that not only is women's memory not inferior to men's, but in some fields, and especially in attention to certain details, it can function stronger than men's. Thus, these justifications are no longer acceptable. So, what must be done? We must try to understand this verse with greater precision and without prejudice regarding traditional interpretations. The proposal raised here is to understand this verse within the general framework of the Quran's view on women. When we look at the Quran, throughout it, we see a serious and decisive movement in the defense of women's rights. Is it logical that a book which defends women's dignity and rights to this extent would want to set their value at half that of men here? Perhaps this verse can be understood in this way. The Quran started a gradual, step-by-step movement to defend women's rights. This movement faced severe resistance from the culture and beliefs of that time. The Quran was actually giving the right of testimony to women for the first time. This was a major transformation in itself, but there were opponents who did not accept this structural breaking and said, women do not have the ability to testify. Perhaps this verse is a response to these very opponents. It is as if the Quran is saying, you who say women are incapable and make mistakes, then let us place 2 women instead of 1 man, so that if one makes a mistake, the other corrects her. In this way, your objection is removed, and at the same time, women find the right to be present in court and testify. From this angle, the Quran is actually gradually introducing its audience to an important principle. The principle that the criterion for accepting testimony is not gender, but precision, memory, and trustworthiness. The Quran was combating prejudices and humiliating behaviors toward women with a smart and gradual method. If we look at some societies today that still consider women's social presence a disgrace and are willing to do anything to prevent it, we understand better why the Quran had to proceed with caution and gradually. An interesting point is that in some readings of the Quran, instead of أن تضل إحداهما فتذكر إحداهما الأخرى, so that if one errs, it has been narrated as إن تضل إحداهما فتذكر إحداهما الأخرى. Based on this reading, the interpretation we raised appears clearer, meaning if your concern is the possibility of them making a mistake, with this method it will be compensated. Therefore, it is true that the Quran placed 2 women instead of 1 man, but the best interpretation one can have of this verse is to say that this was a gradual movement to combat severe prejudices against women's rights and social presence, not a humiliation of women or a declaration of their weak memory. Regarding other topics like inheritance and blood money, where in some divisions the woman's share is half the man's, one must note that the Quran stated such rulings based on a specific economic system, wherein all financial responsibilities of the family were placed on the man's shoulders, and the woman had no financial obligation. In such conditions, the man's larger share in inheritance and the higher blood money for men are intended to create a balance in assets and compensate for economic damages, because the man must provide for family expenses and spend what he earns on his wife and children, whereas the wealth a woman inherits belongs entirely to her and she has no obligation to spend it. Furthermore, the blood money of a man who has passed away is most often given to the woman, his wife and family. In any case, even if ambiguities and unanswered questions remain in this subject, one thing is completely clear. The Quran has always emphasized justice and human dignity and has repeatedly defended women's rights and the necessity of justice toward them. Therefore, what was raised as different interpretations should not be considered a justification contrary to the apparent meaning of the verses just to make the book appear reasonable. Rather, when the Quran itself explicitly and emphatically defends women, their rights and justice in social and family relations, one must prefer interpretations that are in harmony with the other verses of this book.